Hello, welcome to this video. In this video, we're going to start making the desert scene, and more specifically, we're going to start out with creating the landscape. So let's start here in Houdini by creating a height field. So we can use our height field node and go in there, and then we have a basic height field, as you can see. So by default, we can already play around here with, for example, the size or the grid. So this will return the quality. And for the moment, we can actually leave it at the default value. We can always later go here back at the size and change it if we want bigger or smaller world. Now furthermore, we're going to first start out with creating a pattern. So we have a height field pattern node. So plug that in over here. And by default, it will give you something like this. Now in this node, we're going to go here to our pattern and we're going to change this from stars to a ramp. So now as you can see, we have this ramp. It goes like that. And we can control it by this, of course. And in this case, let's start by making something like this. And we can add some more points, tweak this, and what we can also do is we can open here this ramp menu. We can select all points by holding shift, and we can change this to, for example, like a B-spline. So it's like a nice curve. So you can play around with these different settings, and I think I'm going to keep it to the B-spline. Now further down here, we also have Distort pattern. So let's click on that as well. And you can see that there is some distortion going on. So we want to play around here with the amplitude, and let's start maybe like 500. You can see that we have now distorted this a lot. Now, of course, this is a quite high value, and I also have to then change the element size here, and let's start at maybe something around 300, which is still very intense. And I also would like to set the roughness a bit lower here, and this is actually really interesting now. So let's keep the roughness at something like 0.2. So as you can see, if I don't distort the pattern, it's perfectly straight lines. If I distort them, it's going to create these interesting lines here that are sort of like the basics of my scent here. Now, of course, this is way too intense still, so that we go here at the top. And in here we have our main height. So I'm going to change this here to maybe something like 20, 24. So just like a more subtle. I'm going to go here with 20, and maybe also let's do a post blur. Let's see if that works now nicely. And this already gives me a very interesting result, as you can see. And let's see if like 3 is enough, or maybe more. What we can also do is we have here our pattern, and if I don't disable the noise here, the distortion, we can also play around here with the size of this. So we have here more lines, but we can also have less lines. So we're going to start out with first the big shapes. So I will increase this ramp value here. So let's start out maybe here, something like this value, and let's enable here the distortion. And now this is a better effect that I'm actually looking for. So this gives a more scent feeling there. So this is better. Now I'm going to keep reusing this node, so I'm just going to copy it. And I'm going to change some of the values here. So let's first of all maybe start here playing around with the size of the ramp. We can see we can then already here start creating some interesting patterns. So maybe this will help breaking up some of the parts a bit more. We can also here play around with this ramp value, which can also be interesting. So maybe something like this. And also important here is actually want to add this to my current layer. So we can add these values on top of each other. So if I do replace or add, this will make some difference You can also like play around with, for example, subtracting it or other ways. So you can get really interesting shapes there. So I'm going to add them so they have a bit more parts that stick out. Now I'm going to copy this once more again. And I'm going to set this to add as well. And with this one, I'm going to create a bit more smaller shapes or medium shapes. So these are mainly like really big shapes for my desert scene, but I want to have now some more smaller ones. So let's go here into the size. Let's bring this down all the way to maybe 70. And this is way too intense. So let me bring down the height to maybe 6. You can also remove the blurring or still keep a little bit blurring. I like to reload this a bit. So you still have some of these lines there. And then you can still play around here. We can do even offsets if you want that. But I'm going to keep it to 0, 0 because it nicely follows my terrain here. Then next up, I want to then smooth some of the peaks of this terrain. So I'm going to do a mask by feature. And we're going to select then the peaks of this terrain. So I'm going to do that by using the height. So here, height, I'm going to click on compute range. And then we can play around here with sliders. So probably around something like this. And increase this a bit more. Then we can use a blur. So blur. And then we have our terrain and our mask controlling that blur. As you can see, we can now blur down these top layers. So let me also do a clear, so we can remove the mask, so clear mask. So you can see this a bit better. So this blur was maybe too much. But let's give it like a blur value, like 20 maybe. And also after this, so I got some of my base shapes that I want. So I have some like variation in the terrain, but now I think it's overall quite intense. So we're going to remap it to a lower value. So we're going to just compute range. We can then here use our output max. And what if we press, for example, 10 in here, we can now have a more subtle terrain going like so. So you can play around with this. So maybe you still want a bit more. So maybe let's try 12. So it's like a little bit more. Then you can have it like this. Now next up, we're going to add some noise. So height field noise here. This will help adding some detail. So here in the noise, let's lower down the amplitude to around 200. And you can also play around here with the size. So maybe increase this, like so. So we have some details going on. And you can always play further around, play here, for example, with the roughness, or give more or less. But I think the 0.5 value is pretty good here. Then next up, we can do a resample. I will show in a minute why this will be useful. So let's resample. So what we will do here is click on set specific exact resolution. And we're going to use the grid spacing, and we're just going to fill in 1. And you can see that my quality will go a little bit up. So here by the start, our grid spacing was 2, and now it is 1. So it's like more detailed. Now I would like to use the slump, so height fit slump. But before we can use that, we also need to have a mask. So I'm going to use the mask by feature again. And in here, I'm just going to use the slope feature. And let's bring that down. So maybe around 10. And also bring the max here down to maybe around, let's keep it maybe to 15. Like so. So we like select these parts. Now we can bring that into the slump here. And after that, again, I'm going to clear out my mask. So clear mask. And you will see that everywhere where we had that mask going, we will now have like a smoother version. So the slump will sort of like smooth it out, simulate some like dirt layer on top of it. And also I can go back here to my resample, and if I don't use my resample, we can see that this has a big impact on the slump. So it can be a good idea to increase the resolution a little bit for the slump here. So you can always go here into that mask, and you can then here play around with that. So as you can see, we can really smooth out a lot of parts of my terrain if you want to do that. So I think here around 10 was a good value to just have a few parts being a bit more smoothed. So this is just overall the base setup of my sand layer. And now I want to add a little bit more sand structure in there, and I'm going to use another pattern node. And I'm going to just start here separately. So I'm going to copy paste here from my original height field there. And let's focus a bit more on getting that pattern. So here in the pattern, I'm going to put the blur on 0 for now. And the size, I want to have like small detail. I'm going to set this to 2. And what is interesting now is when I would go here to scale, hold the middle mouse, and if I, for example, do something like this, you can see now we have that pattern here. So we have these things going on. So maybe also let's remove the distortion here. And we can then here have like a really fine pattern. So maybe 0.5. Well, let's stick to 0.6 then. And on there, let's use a distort node. So height field distortion. And let's see what that gives us. And this gives us sort of like a very small detail version of some sand. And you can see that this is quite intense. So let me bring up the height here to, let's maybe say 5. So it's like really subtle, maybe even more, like 3. So you can see we have like some subtle like sand structure there. You can also here in the distort play around a bit more with the amplitudes here. So it depends on how much variation you want there. So maybe tweak that a little bit. And now I can multiply this effect on my terrain ahead here. So we can use a layer, so height field layer node. And in here we have then an option here to basically blend two different height fields. So we can plug in here our base terrain and our detail. So by default it will look like this. And what we can do here is currently the layer mode is set to replace, but we can also set this, for example, again to add. And now we are adding that detail on to the other one. Of course, this is quite intense, and I would also like to have a mask for this, so this is not everywhere. So I'm going to use a mask by feature. And in here, I'm just going to do it again based on slope. So let's maybe say something like this. I think I like that. And then use a blur. So we have a smooth transition. So this will result then in a smoother transition. So let's put it over here. And as you can see, we now have sort of like areas where we have this and areas with that detail. So I still think that this is quite an intense effect. You can also here control the mask strength. And I think I'm going to use this to then keep my details like subtle in the terrain. So again, we can further play around more with the setup. So this is sort of like the base here. And if you, for example, did not like, for example, the noise, or did not like all the noises that I added here, I think this is a bit better. Or let's maybe also remove the other one. Yeah, I think this is better, this noise. Maybe I don't like it that much, but you can also play around and tweak it more, or keep it subtle. But I think I like this more, so we have some terrain. Now next up in here, I want to create some more like dunes. I want to create some more places that are higher up and are lower up. So I'm going to create sort of dunes. So I'm going to start it here again from my base height field, and I'm going to use the noise. So height field noise. And in there, let's go and use the Worley noise. So we're going to go here to Worley. So this gives a cool effect like this. But of course, this is quite high. So let's play around here like that. So these will be our dunes. So depending on the scaling here, we can have more or less. So I think something like this is okay. We can also here offset it. So let's play around with the offset a bit. So it's always a good idea to play around here with like offset values. So whenever you build a terrain, they always look a bit different. Now from here, I want to blur this a bit more because they don't really look like sand dunes. So let's bring on a blur. So height field blur. So you can blur everything, or we can again use a mask. So we can decide to use the mask by feature again. In here, we can then, for example, select again the top parts or other parts. What we can also do is we can, for example, use the peaks and curvature. So we can calculate here these peaks, and we can blur out these sharp edges. So let's play around also with the ramp here. I'm gonna delete everything and maybe try out doing something like this and boost that a bit. And I quite like this. So these are sort of like the more sharp parts of my terrain at the moment. And we can always blur this as well. So we can use a blur, so mask blurring. And in there we can then blur this out a bit, like maybe 5, 4. And then use this here. And then we can have this result. Or we can here, of course, invert the mask. And then we have these peaks. And then we can have this really specific blur there on the sharper edges. So then after that, I actually want to do like then after that, let's do a normal blur. And this one is just a bit subtle, so just to keep it like this, so maybe 3 should be okay. And this might give me still the opportunity to choose if I want to invert the mask or not, because if I look here a bit like this, I feel like this is a bit better. As like a sand. You give me like a better feeling of that. Then we can also, for example, here use this detail and blend that in over there as well. So we can bring that node in over here, that layer node, and we can basically do the same as we did there. So we can add some of that effect in there. Then again, this is quite intense. So we can here use a blend, and we can then use a subtle blend here, and you can also see that this will make my terrain less intense. And we have like this subtle sand there. So now we have these two here, and we want to blend these together. So to blend them together, I'm gonna again use that layer, so height feed layer. So I will have here my base sand and some of more dunes of the sand. Now next up I want to create a mask for this input so it controls a bit more on when we switch to one another. So I will use a node called mask noise. And we can, for example, just take it from here. And as you can see, we can generate this here. So we can play around with the size here. And I think I just want something like that. And after that, I want to remap this value. So I want to remap the mask. So I can, here with the ramp, I can, as you can see, control this better. Do something like this. And then to have a better transition, we can then blur the mask. So we have better transitions between one another. So we can, let's just start out with that value. Let's put it in over here, and let's see how that goes. Yeah, you can see that the result I'm getting now is pretty bad. It doesn't look that good. So one of the reasons for that is, if I look at this string and this string, the height level is different. So you can see that this is sort of like lower than my other string. So we can try fixing here some of the scaling. So if I go here, we can try to fix here these offsets. But what I would like to do is use a remapping. So use a remap node. And in the remap node, we're gonna just do auto compute. So it computes the range. I'm gonna set here the clip on, and I'm gonna do a new range, and the minimum should be 0 and the maximum should be 50. Then I'm gonna copy paste this over here as well, and we're gonna do the exact same. So compute range, minimum 0, maximum 50. So if I now view the other terrain, you can see that there is way less difference here in spacing. So if I would view this one, you can see how much lower this one is compared to the other one. So look at it over here, and let's check if that works better. And indeed, this works a bit better. Now you can still play around here with, for example, the blend, like blend them more together. I think blending 100 here is doing a good job. And then basically the mask here is controlling where my dunes are. So if I play around with my mask, you can see that we can then change a bit more where these are. So we can have a terrain here where we have a more flatter region, and then we can have a terrain here where we have more of these dunes in my scene. That was it for the first video. So we created here the base terrain for my desert, and you can still play around with this more. As I showed you, you can always go back to certain values, tweak certain parameters, add more of these dunes, and so on. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you for watching.